Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Hey, today we have with us Margie Agin, who is the founder and chief strategist of Centerboard Marketing. Margie, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, you're welcome. Hey, I want to get into talking about your work in brands and brand breakthrough in your book, but give us a little bit of background on yourself. What was your business and corporate background that led you to start your firm, Centerboard Marketing?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm chief strategist of Centerboard Marketing. We help B2B tech companies discover what makes them unique and then find the words to say it. So our sweet spot is the intersection of product marketing, content, and demand gen. It's particularly for tech companies that have really complex products and solutions. So it's a longer sale, a lot more decision makers, a lot more questions that buyers have in their mind. So what that means in practice, so we start with a messaging framework that outlines differentiators and positioning, stories and proof points. And then from that kind of fundamental infrastructure, we produce content that's customer-facing, website copy, campaign materials, sales tools, all the things that B2B companies use to help move buyers through the sales cycle. In terms of my background, so I started Centerboard about 8 years ago. Before that, for 15 years, I was an in-house marketer. So I came from the client side, and then became an advisor to companies similar to the ones I had worked for. I led marketing teams at Blackboard, which is an EdTech provider, and Cisco. And before that, I was at a video conferencing company called Tandberg, which was kind of a wild ride and grew really rapidly before it was acquired by Cisco. So kind of had that experience of being both, the small, fast-growing company and then the big Borg. And I started my career in market research, actually, in competitive intelligence. And that was an interesting way to start in marketing. Very different, almost the opposite extreme from branding and sort of the things that I do now. It was focused much more sort of on ground up information gathering. And the firm I worked with helped companies kind of explore new markets and look at acquisition targets. So we did a lot of interviewing of, hundreds of people, tech subject matter experts. And that's kind of a big part of still what I do today. I get in the shoes of the customer, talk with them about their needs and requirements and how they make decisions. And then that kind of goes from the ground up to build this messaging framework and ultimately the brand.
You mentioned Blackboard, and it's interesting because right now I've got in one of my internet tabs open Blackboard because I teach marketing at a few universities, and one of the LMS they use is Blackboard. So I've used that for years and years. So that's interesting. And then as you were giving that opening intro, I was thinking of a couple of books, and I am certain you're a book reader because readers are leaders. Have you read the book Win Without Pitching by Blair Enns and Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller?
Yes, both. Okay. Absolutely. So,
if anyone has not, get them, read them. And interestingly enough, at the time of this recording yesterday, I interviewed the Win Without Pitching director of coaching, Shannon Lee, and it was really, really a great interview. We talked a lot about what we're going to talk about here today, which is the combination of those two books I just mentioned is basically get your message right, and if you confuse, you lose, and that's the nutshell of those approaches. And so how do you take that and really tie that into working with your tech companies? But what is the first place you start typically with a company when you work with them on fine-tuning their messaging?
Ideally with the customer. We have to get started a little bit understanding the technology and the story of the company, right? Just to understand what they do, especially in a tech field, right? It does take, that discovery process to sort of get deep and understand what the tools do. But as quickly as possible, we get to talking to the customer. And I think that's important because really throughout the entire experience, I try to put myself in the shoes as the advocate of the customer, kind of the empty chair, in the room. Yeah. And companies think that they should be talking about themselves often, right? And they're very excited, justifiably, about what they've created and what they want to share. But truly, the customers don't actually care about you. They care about themselves and their own problems. So
because everyone's favorite radio station, have you heard this before? What's everyone's favorite radio station? WIIFM. What's in it for me?
For me, yeah.
So
yeah,
everyone's
it's true.
That. Who cares about your dumb company? What are you going to do for me, and how can I be improved? So, yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, so the companies that build the brand value are really those that demonstrate how well they understand their customers' goals and challenges, right? And make that connection right away, build the trust, and then once you kind of have that connection, your customers are willing to listen when you start sharing how your company and products help them and you start talking about it yourself, right? So one of the first things we do when we talk with customers, we develop empathy maps. These are, I don't know if you're familiar with them, they've been used in UX for a long time, really, to understand how customers interact with products.
Similar to like the customer's buyer's journey, but it kind of focused on the emotional side?
But the emotional, yeah. So a map will look at what customers care about, how they feel, how they behave, and what they say. There's sort of 4 quadrants. So absolutely we think about the emotional side as well as the logical side. I mean, people think B2B buyers are all about logic, and that is part of the equation, but they also make emotional decisions and have emotional connections to brand. I mean, when you think about for a B2B buyer, risk is scary, and so...
Because it could be their job on the line.
Yeah, there's that old, no one ever got fired for choosing IBM.
Choosing IBM, right. Yep,
right.
I heard that.
So people often have to take a step to change the status quo, and so we need to kind of tap into their emotions as well as how they make logical decisions based on, return on investment and the business case. So we look at how they feel, also how they behave, and then what they say. And what they say is really important to understand the language that they use so that when you write your content and you craft copy for your website and so forth, you can kind of reflect that language back to them, so almost mirroring it, so they get that, okay, these people understand me, they're answering my questions, they're almost like in my head thinking about the problems that I face and the way I would phrase them. So we listen very carefully to the questions they ask. And then you mentioned the buyer's journey. So the map is sort of one piece, and then the journey looks at what questions do customers ask at different stages. So they start in sort of their own world, their own context, before you as a brand ever even enter their consciousness. So you really have to understand first where they're coming from and kind of the environment they're in. And there's some kind of trigger or aha moment. Maybe you introduce that, right? Or maybe there's like a compliance change or a competitive change or something that then, kind of changes their outlook. So we get to sort of all the different decisions and questions that they ask along the journey, ups and downs of the journey, objections they raise. And then at the end, that's the vision that you paint of the new normal, right? The
future pacing.
The future of what your world could look like after you go through the journey. And that's sort of how you measure success and how you want to paint a picture of the vision of the customer's life, both logical and emotional, of how they feel after they've had the experience, working with you.
I'm sure when you said that, it makes me think of the old stat, people love to buy, but they don't like to be sold, and then they buy on emotion, but then they want to validate that by facts. So, yeah, you might be analytical and go, well, the ROI and the KPIs are, and here's all these numbers and stuff, and that's nice, but they kind of want to go, what's in it for me, and how does it make me feel, and what is it going to do, and kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They want to be seen with that status and prestige and recognition, and then you can get into, and then that's a good decision and then throw out the facts. Is that kind of like what you see in your work as well?
Yeah, absolutely, right? The buyer goes through all of that.
Yep.
And if you think about, the buyer as sort of the hero of the story.
Yep.
And
not you.
Not you,
You're the guide.
right? You're the guide, you're the partner. I think that's, and I will say, because I've also turned this on myself, right, and looked at my own business, it can be very hard to get out of your own way to do that. Even though you read that in the books, and you hear this again and again, when it comes to your own company, it can be hard to step away from the idea of, but I need to tell them this, they need to know this.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does actually help to have a third party, talking to the customers, looking at the competitors, listening and asking questions because they're new to this whole thing and they're not embedded in it every day. And to kind of draw that out from you, it inside of yourself, but there's just so many layers that sit in between you and sort of the external view that it can be difficult to get to.
And you said, on the interview yesterday with Shannon Lee, we were talking about this point, which is, you've got to have this process. You diagnose and assess and ask questions, and that's leading them to understand what their true need is and all of these kind of things. And I said, don't you work with people that go, yeah, I get that, but I don't think my clients are so different. My prospects, they're so busy because, and we would never work. And she's like, yeah, but here's the thing. You have to realize that you have to understand that the process is proven, that it works, and then you have to kind of just trust the process. So when you were saying there about, it's so hard to, do that, you've got to realize that it works, and maybe possibly you need to be like you see in all the TV shows about the doctors, in fact, just the other day, my family and I were watching an old rerun of ER from back in the 90s or whatever, and there was an episode where this crusty old doctor, had a heart issue, went through the ER, and then he comes out and he goes, my life has changed because until you're the patient, you don't realize what you're going through. I'm going to be a much better doctor. So do you find that some of your clients need to go through the process from the other side, be the customer and get some bad experience and then counteract that with a good experience so they can go, that's the difference. I need to be doing this. It shows this, care and empathy because I did ask questions, and I don't need to be afraid of doing that with my sales process. Yeah,
it's funny that you say that, right? It's like physician, heal thyself, right?
Yep.
I think I do get that. I do get that pushback. I think that there are times that companies are almost afraid to talk to their customers, either or they're just removed from them, right?
Yeah.
And especially in a B2B context, there can be a lot of layers. There's partners and distributors, and then the buyer is different from the user, and so it does sometimes take a little work to get to that real, that person who can offer some input. But I think it's okay to not do a massive, survey of 10,000 people. Honestly, even a collection of 5 people gives you enough anecdotal evidence that it's sort of eye-opening that then you start to want more. So even
that's the best primary data you can get because it's in your own company, business, and you can go, hey, the last 25 clients, I noticed this, and then that's not industry secondary, that's your primary data. That's a huge thing. It doesn't need to be a big sample.
No, it's exactly. And so, win-loss interviews are very interesting too, to try to talk to companies that, the deals that you've won, but also deals that you've lost. And, it doesn't have to be public information. We're not doing case studies or things like that. Always we can just be saying, hey, I want to, talk to you about your experience and just use this for our internal, knowledge base so that we can do better next time. Right. Yeah. So that companies that invest in that find a lot of value, from what customers and lost customers say that they would not otherwise know.
I agree 100%. Hey, let's shift over to your book and just kind of grab a 30,000-foot view of brand breakthrough, how to go beyond a catchy tagline and build authentic, influential, and sustainable brand personality. Give us a little background on the book, and what's a couple points that someone would really immediately be able to learn and implement from your book?
Sure. So the impetus of the book, I mentioned that I started in market research, right, and sort of the never thought I'd be writing about brand as part of my job or helping companies with brand. And I think so the frustration that I saw working both internally and externally as a marketer was what drove me to develop this book. I think most people think of brand as like a 10,000-foot view, and I don't come from that world. So what I found was, as I was involved in a lot of brand projects, and what I often saw was kind of delivered to us from above, typically in the form of like a broad umbrella brand statement or a brand vision, visual identity, and then it was up to the rest of the marketing team, as well as the organization, the sales team and the, even customer and technical service, anybody who touches customers, to kind of interpret what that brand vision meant on the ground to do our job. And there was a big gap. There was this missing piece, which was more, detailed kind of positioning and messaging and examples to help actually build the customer-facing content like website copy or emails or sales decks or, anything really that people then actually do on a day-to-day basis. So you ended up having a lot of brand dilution because people would interpret that broad statement or vision in many different ways, and a lot of cycles and a lot of time wasted in developing content and kind of recreating the wheel every time and guessing. So, brand projects that can be, they're expensive, 10, 20% of a marketing budget could go into a brand revamp or refresh, and often falls flat because you've got, people don't know how to interpret it. So when I built Centerboard, I wanted to help close that gap so internal teams could execute, with a consistent voice, save time creating content, and then get the most value from their brand work.
Love it. I mean, that's concise and boils it down to here's what we can do to help you out. So let's wrap up, Margie. What is the best way that someone could pick up a copy of your book, reach out to you, learn more about Centerboard, and see how you can help them fine-tune their message?
The best way to find me and Centerboard is my website. So it's centerboard-marketing.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Margie Agin. Please find me if you're interested in talking more about this process or just want to stay connected. Happy to connect with anybody. And then the book itself is on Amazon. It's, as you said, Brand Breakthrough, How to Go Beyond a Catchy Tagline to Build an Authentic, Influential, and Sustainable Brand Personality. And there's actually, that's a mouthful. So there's also a shortcut. I have a page that I built on my site for listeners to the podcast. So it's just brand-breakthrough.com. And on there is kind of a little synopsis of the book. And then there's also a downloadable kind of action guide that goes in parallel with the book, but it's got a lot of hands-on activities and checklists and interview questions that kind of help you apply the information that you learn in the book and kind of kickstart your brand journey. So that's a good place to start. You can kind of start with that and kind of use that to develop your own kind of interview guides and journey process. And then it's kind of a parallel to sort of more of the case studies and the interviews that are in the book that kind of talk more about the theory behind it.
Well, I will make sure to include both of those websites on our show notes for you so that people can click on your main website as well as Brand Breakthrough. So thank you so much for coming on. It was really great chatting with you and getting to know you. And if anyone is listening and has appreciated this interview and other ones we've done, please rate this podcast on iTunes. Just go to ratethispodcast.com/influential and give a rating. And I know I would certainly appreciate it and the feedback. So Margie, thank you for your time. It was really fun and wonderful chatting with you today.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.